She was scrubbing floors in silence when the CEO tossed her car keys and laughed. "Fix it. And it's yours." They all watched mocking, recording as she opened the hood and made the engine purr like new. But instead of thanks, he called security. Said she tampered with company property. Now she's in handcuffs, surrounded by cops, corporate lies, and a secret the engine was never supposed to reveal. And what they find under the hood will change everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Rosa Langston moved through the halls of Griffin Tech like a shadow, always present, always silent, always invisible. The Chicago-based tech firm buzzed with activity during the day, full of eager developers, startup energy and million-dollar pitches. But at night, when the glass offices dimmed and the boardroom sharks went home, Rosa emerged with her mop and rolling cart, cleaning up the messes made by those who never once said her name. Her uniform was simple, her afro always neatly braided back, her eyes alert but careful not to hold contact too long. In elevators, no one greeted her. The same people she wiped floors behind during all-nighters never held a door. Once she'd caught two interns giggling as she passed. "Looks like they let the help in through the front now." Another time an executive asked if she could do something about the chemical smell coming from her hair. She had laughed softly, politely, because what else was safe? But inside she folded each insult neatly into the growing stack she stored behind her ribs, along with her dreams and her dignity. Rosa didn't speak often, but her mind ran faster than most engines. Every break she got, she disappeared into the janitor's supply closet, a space she'd claimed like holy ground. There, between bottles of ammonia and stacked paper towels, she kept an old fold-out table with a spread of auto engine blueprints, some dating back to the. She studied diagrams by flashlight, traced torque maps with her fingers, memorized the rotational timing of different engine types like scripture. It wasn't just hobby, it was blood. Her grandfather had been a self-taught mechanic in Arkansas, a man who rebuilt his first engine before he turned 12. Rosa never met him, but stories of his brilliance were gospel in her house, passed down like sacred lore. She believed she'd inherited more than his eyes. She wanted to build, not just repair but invent, engineer, lead. But at Griffin Tech her name wasn't in the innovation department. It was on the bottom of a cleaning roster, printed in Arial font beside restroom zone 3. That night was colder than most. The city wind slipped through the parking lot like a whispered threat, and Rosa tugged her cardigan tighter as she pushed her cleaning cart toward the back exit. Her earbuds were in, but she wasn't playing music, just listening to the engine sounds of a 1969 Shelby Cobra she'd downloaded for study. She paused, distracted by a mechanical groan nearby. In the far corner of the lot sat a sleek Bentley Continental GT, all white with chrome rims that looked hand-polished. Steam puffed from under the hood like a silent scream. That's when she saw him, Carter Hale, young, white, designer, stubbled and always walking too fast, as if the world owed him a red carpet, the kind of man who smirked when he entered rooms and had never needed to audition for power. Rosa knew him from photos and whispered warnings. He'd inherited Griffin Tech after its founder. His uncle died in a skiing accident, and since then he'd turned it into a buzzword factory of innovation and IPO hype. She watched as Carter slammed his car door and cursed under his breath. He looked around, spotted her by the exit, and waved her over, not like a person but like someone might summon a ride-share. Rosa paused, cautious, then approached. "You fix engines, right?" Carter said, eyes narrowed. He gestured at the Bentley like it was a wounded animal. "This heap of metal just died on me. Batteries new, starters fine, something electrical." Rosa hesitated but nodded slightly. Carter looked her over, eyebrows lifted. "Tell you what," he said with a chuckle that stung colder than the wind. "Fix this and the car's yours." The smile on his face was too wide to be sincere. He thought it was a joke, a mockery dressed as a dare, a rich man's version of throwing crumbs. She knew he expected her to shake her head, maybe mumble something about being a janitor, and walk away. But Rosa didn't blink. She stepped closer to the Bentley, slowly, reverently, as if approaching a beast she could tame. Carter leaned against a nearby lamppost, arms crossed, bored already. "You know," he added lazily, "my guy in Lake Forest couldn't even figure it out. You sure you want to give it a go, sweetheart?" Rosa didn't respond. Instead she reached forward, popped the hood open with one hand, and looked inside. Her eyes scanned the engine bay, not just seeing wires and metal but mapping the story it told. And then she smiled. Rosa didn't flinch under Carter's smug gaze. She didn't need to. The moment she lifted that Bentley's hood, time softened. The air stilled. The steam curling from the engine wasn't chaos to her. It was language. coated and ancient. She leaned in, her hand brushing the polished edge, fingers twitching toward memory. Her grandfather's voice came back first. Soft, southern, steady. The engine speaks if you're quiet enough to listen. It ain't just parts, it's a pulse. Rosa had been 5 when she first followed him into the collapsing red barn behind their Arkansas trailer. He'd given her a wrench too big for her hand, told her to loosen a bolt. She had failed, cried even. But he hadn't laughed. Fail better next time, he'd said, handing her a smaller tool. By age 10 she was assisting. By 12 she was doing solo teardown. And by 13 she had taken a rust-ridden 1981 Chevrolet Monte Carlo from a junkyard corpse to a growling miracle, its rebuilt engine singing on a lonely gravel road, while her grandfather watched with glassy eyes, nodding as if saluting his past. That Monte Carlo had been her first love. She named it Grace. When he passed, she couldn't afford to transport the car to Chicago. She left it behind, parked under an old magnolia tree, hood covered in fallen blooms. In every grease stain since she had seen her grandfather's hand. And now, under this Bentley hood, Rosa felt the same sacred calling. It wasn't just fixing a car, it was reclaiming the fire buried deep in her blood. The issue revealed itself in seconds. An electrical grounding failure. Minor corrosion had compromised the harness near the alternator, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. A novice might assume it was the battery, or worse, the start. Carter's expensive guy in Lake Forest probably replaced parts in frustration, chasing ghosts, but Rosa saw the truth, knew it instinctively. Still, she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the engine's casing. Carter wasn't just mocking her. He was testing her humanity. The dare wasn't about fixing a car. It was a performance, a punchline he expected her to flub. She could walk away, preserve her dignity, avoid the mess. But her pride whispered, "This is yours, not the car, the money. You earned this through every quiet humiliation, every time someone talked around you like you were wallpaper, every time your ideas died inside your chest because the room wasn't safe to speak them aloud." She walked briskly back to the janitor's closet and returned with a battered red toolbox, a gift from a retired maintenance worker who'd seen her sketching a carburetor diagram during break. "You'll need these someday," he'd said, smiling like he already knew. Under the moonlight, Rosa went to work. Her tools weren't shiny or digital. No torque wrenches with Bluetooth sensors. Just old-school socket heads, rubber grips darkened from years of use, and hands that moved like they were dancing with history. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft clicks of tightening bolts, and the occasional grunt as she maneuvered under the chassis on flattened cardboard. Her braid swayed with every twist, her cardigan spotted with oil. No spectators, no camera, just the soft hum of city air and the fire of a woman reshaping destiny with every turn of her wrist. 3 hours later, she stepped back, wiped her hands on a rag, turned the ignition. The Bentley didn't cough. It roared, a deep, luxurious purr that settled into a confident idle, like a lion just fed. Rosa's lips curled into a quiet smile. Not pride, not gloating, just peace. She closed the hood gently, as if tucking in a child. The wind picked up, rustling her notes on the nearby bench. She gathered them, placed them carefully in her satchel, and walked away without a word, leaving the purring beast gleaming under the lamplight. At 7:40 the next morning, Carter Hale walked into the lot, sipping espresso from a glass tumbler. His eyes scanned toward the Bentley, expecting what, exactly? Maybe that it would still be dead. Maybe that the janitor had given up. He didn't expect what he saw. A freshly cleaned vehicle, idling perfectly, headlights gleaming like new coins. His steps slowed. He circled the car once, confused, then pulled the door open and slid in, turned the knob. The engine responded like a champion thoroughbred, flawless and obedient. He let out a low whistle, sat back in disbelief, and muttered, "No damn way." Rosa stood at the edge of the lot, silent, holding her mop handle like a cane. Carter spotted her through the windshield and stepped out. "You actually did it?" he asked, genuine awe softening his tone for the first time. She nodded. Not smug, just grounded. There was a flicker in his eyes, something that might have been gratitude, or panic, or both. But it didn't last. He laughed. Not a joyful laugh, not even surprised amusement. It was sharp, guttural, mocking. "Well damn," he said, shaking his head. "Didn't think the help had that in them." The words slapped harder than any hand ever could. "I was kidding, you know," he added, walking past her. "Car's not actually yours. Thought you'd get that." He didn't look back as he left, still chuckling. Rosa didn't move. Her chest rose and fell slowly, anger caught beneath sorrow, dignity battling disbelief. But her eyes remained dry, steady. She turned her gaze back toward the Bentley, and then down at her oil-stained hands. If Carter thought that moment belonged to him, he was wrong. The real story hadn't even begun. As Carter disappears into the building, Rosa notices something strange on the engine she just fixed. A diagnostic chip she didn't install, and a blinking red light pulsing beneath it. The Bentley's engine was barely cool before the mockery began. Word traveled fast in the Griffin Tech hive, too fast. By mid-morning the whispers turned to smirks, and by lunch they had bloomed into full-blown ridicule. "Did you hear about the janitor?" Someone whispered in the break room. "Fixed Carter's car with a mop and a prayer," another joked. One executive mockingly mimed tightening bolts as she passed Rosa in the hallway, barely hiding her laughter. "Better hide your Teslas," someone muttered behind her back, loud enough for her to hear. She didn't flinch, not on the outside, but inside, something sharp twisted. Carter hadn't denied her fix, he simply said nothing. No thank you, no public acknowledgement, no quiet nod. Instead, he let the company fill in the silence with cruelty, and that silence spoke louder than words. Rosa became invisible again, but this time with thorns. People no longer just ignored her. They actively avoided her. Doors closed quicker, conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Elevator rides became icy. Even her cleaning routes were quietly reassigned, moving her away from executive floors, as if her presence were now radioactive. She applied for an internal apprenticeship in Griffin Tech's engineering division, a program technically open to all employees. Her portfolio was robust, schematics drawn by hand, independent certifications, online coursework with top marks, and even mechanical simulations she coded in her off hours. She submitted it quietly, professionally. A week later, the rejection came. One line. "No interview. Thank you for your interest, but at this time we feel you may not be the right cultural fit for the program." That phrase, cultural fit, stung with a venom Rosa recognized. It wasn't about skills. It was about comfort. She made them uncomfortable. A black janitor who dared to dream beyond her rank. Her presence disrupted their story of what genius looked like. She didn't argue, didn't email back. Instead, she doubled down in silence. Nights became her sanctuary. When the lights dimmed and the desks emptied, Rosa turned the supply closet into a secret lab. She collected discarded parts, old processors, misordered gears. She wrote code on torn notepads, connected wires to repurposed circuit boards. She was building something, an engine design so efficient, so lightweight, it could redefine hybrid mobility. She called it Project Echo. Each night she soldered and sketched and calibrated alone, whispering old mechanical prayers under her breath, channeling her grandfather's ghost in the hum of each prototype. She was no longer just dreaming. She was building a future they didn't believe she was capable of even imagining. But then came the final insult. On a Friday afternoon, Rosa walked into the lounge to clean the espresso machine and saw Carter Hale on the wall-mounted screen. An exclusive CNBC interview playing to a room of interns. "We recently solved some major performance issues with our luxury AI vehicle line," Carter said with a charismatic grin. "Sometimes innovation is just about perspective. You look under the hood long enough, you find what others miss." Laughter. Applause. Graphics flashed showing the very engine model Rosa had repaired, highlighted, glamorized, rebranded under Carter's name. He was taking credit, not just for the fix, but for her method, her diagnosis, her idea. A slow burn crept up Rosa's throat. He hadn't just mocked her. He had harvested her brilliance and fed it to his image machine. She turned off the TV, her hands trembling. That night she walked into the closet, stared at Project Echo, and made a decision. She would enter the Griffin Tech Annual Innovation Contest. It was open to all staff technically, designed to crowdsource brilliance from every corner of the company. Usually it was won by flashy interns with MBAs and loud ideas. But Rosa didn't care. She wasn't looking to win. She was looking to be seen, to make it undeniable. She adjusted her designs, cleaned up her coding syntax, recalibrated the thermal diagnostics. She worked through the weekend, her fingers raw, her heart steady. On the final day of submission, she printed her proposal, sealed it with the company-mandated cover sheet, and dropped it into the contest submission box in the executive lobby. The receptionist stared at her like she'd just stepped into a sacred temple uninvited. "You sure you're in the right place?" she asked coldly. Rosa smiled. Yes, I built something. 2 days later, the panel opened her folder. The room went silent. One by one, executives leaned in, eyes narrowing, lips parting. No one spoke, not even the engineers. Rosa's prototype didn't just meet the contest standards, it shattered them. A schematic unlike anything they had anticipated. Fluid mechanics rendered by hand, with AI-assisted tweaks. Energy output projections that rivaled their in-house R&D teams. And a signature at the bottom. R. Langston, janitorial staff. In the far corner of the panel room, Carter Hale stiffened as he recognized one tiny detail in the prototype. A design he once dismissed years ago as impractical, now reborn and perfected by the janitor he tried to humiliate. The buzz started as a whisper, creeping through Griffin Tech's R&D floor like an electrical current no one could shut off. It began with subtle curiosity. Did you see prototype Sun 47B? And shifted to hushed awe. No one knew who submitted it. No name anyone recognized. Just a designation, Langston. Interns speculated it must be a silent genius from MIT, someone the company had hired in secret. Engineers argued about the torque ratios and thermal efficiency. How was it this advanced and still under the radar? Project leads pored over the schematics late into the night, marveling at a design that bent rules without breaking them. For a full 24 hours, Rosa Langston's submission was the invisible crown jewel of the contest, praised with reverence, until someone finally asked, "Wait, who's Art Langston?" Someone finally asked, "Wait, who's Art Langston?" HR dug into the employee registry. The name pulled up one profile. Janitorial staff. Night shift. No degrees listed. No corporate badges. No departmental affiliations. Just one photo. Rosa, standing in her blue uniform. Eyes quiet, arms folded in front of a white cinder block wall. The mood flipped like a blown fuse. The awe turned acidic. Whispers turned sharp. "A janitor?" someone said, incredulous. "That's not possible." The design wasn't just impressive. It was disruptive. If someone from outside the engineering bubble could do this, it meant their gates were paper walls. Within hours, the admiration curdled into resentment. Executives convened emergency meetings, thinly veiled under the guise of quality assurance. Rosa's file was pulled, dissected, challenged, and at the top of the resistance stood Carter Hale. He summoned the contest committee into the glass conference room on the 15th floor. The skyline flickered behind him like a theater set, but his attention was laser-focused. "We're setting a dangerous precedent," he said, tapping his pen against the table like a gavel. "There are standards to uphold, protocols." When someone on the panel cautiously noted that Rosa's design passed every test, Carter's jaw clenched. She accessed restricted schematics, he claimed. Without clearance, that's grounds for immediate disqualification. A junior manager spoke up. "Those files were outdated and archived. We've let interns use them for training." Carter didn't flinch. "She's not an intern," he said flatly. "She's janitorial staff. She had no reason to be there." His voice carried the weight of certainty, but beneath it sat something raw, panic twisted with ego. In a locked vault of his memory, Carter remembered another design. A decade earlier, high school. The state science fair. A magnetic suspension model that won first place and earned him his first scholarship. But it wasn't his. The real architect had been his best friend, Malik Dawson, a quiet black teen with a stutter but brilliance like wildfire. Carter had helped him present it, promised to speak on his behalf, then turned around and entered the project under his own name. Malik had been crushed. His family tried to protest, but the school chose Carter. Connections over evidence. Carter buried the truth beneath awards and accolades. But seeing Rosa's name now, attached to genius, reanimated that betrayal like a repressed sin clawing its way back to daylight. Rosa found out about the disqualification in the most disrespectful way possible. A forwarded email not even addressed to her directly. "Due to submission irregularities, entry 47B has been removed from official contest consideration." That was it. No explanation. No hearing. Just erasure. The kind that leaves no fingerprints. She sat quietly in the closet, staring at the words, until they blurred. She didn't cry. Not this time. She packed her designs carefully, walked to the executive floor, and requested an appeal hearing with the company board. The receptionist looked like she might call security, but Rosa didn't move, didn't blink, just said, "I built something. I deserve to speak." The hearing was set 3 days later. She walked in wearing her uniform by choice. No suits, no performance, just herself. She stood in front of the mahogany table, where 6 board members sat, flanked by Carter at the end, his arms folded like stone. "I didn't steal anything," Rosa said, her voice steady. "I didn't cheat, I didn't lie. I built that design with my own hands. In between cleaning your floors and scrubbing your toilets." A pause, silence. She scanned their faces. "If that's not enough for you to see my value, maybe you never meant to see it at all." She looked at Carter. "You said fixing your car was a joke, that I wouldn't even know where to start. Well, I knew. And I fixed it. Just like I fixed this engine. Just like I've been fixing broken systems my whole life." One board member coughed uncomfortably. Another shifted in their chair. Then, a voice soft but firm cut through the silence. "I believe her," said Ruth Delaney, the eldest member on the board. A black woman in her 70s, with silver braids and eyes that had clearly seen decades of glass ceilings. "And I've been waiting a long time for someone like her to walk into this room." Carter stiffened. Ruth turned toward Rosa. "Ms. Langston, would you mind staying after this meeting? I'd like a word." Rosa nodded. The meeting ended. No resolution yet, just silence, uncomfortable and heavy. As the room emptied, Ruth approached her with deliberate grace. "You remind me of someone," she said. "Me. 40 years ago." She leaned in closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Let me tell you what really runs this place." Ruth opens a locked drawer in her office and pulls out a hidden folder labeled Suppressed Patents, Internal Use Only. Rosa leans forward, stunned. The top file is titled Langston. Rosa sat frozen as Ruth Delaney slid the dusty file across the lacquered surface of her desk. The name at the top, Langston V12 Concept, 1976, sent a lightning jolt through her chest. She reached out with trembling fingers, opening the manila folder like a sacred text. Inside were technical diagrams that bore the unmistakable fingerprints of her grandfather's mind. His shorthand, his clean angle sketches, his exact compression ratios. The designs were revolutionary even by modern standards, promising fuel efficiency that would have upended the 1980s market. But stamped across every page in bold red ink was one word: Interner. Do not pursue. Ruth watched Rosa silently, the decades weighing behind her gaze. "Your grandfather worked with Griffin's research subsidiary for 7 months," Ruth said, her voice low but steel-edged. "They loved his ideas, until they realized they couldn't legally take them without putting a black man on the patent. So they shelved them. Quietly. Never told him why. Just said funding fell through. They buried it. Like they've buried so many." Rosa's breath caught. "He died thinking he failed," she whispered. Ruth nodded slowly. "No, he didn't fail. They did. And now they're trying to bury you the same way." Then Ruth stood, crossed the room, and pressed her palm to a panel behind a bookshelf. It clicked open, revealing a narrow stairwell, lit by a dim blue bulb. "Come," she said. Rosa followed without question. The stairwell led down 2 levels below the parking garage, past the service rooms, into an old server archive long forgotten by most of Griffin Tech's upper echelon. But here, humming with quiet life, was the Whisper Network, an underground alliance of engineers, analysts, designers, and former prodigies who had all been silenced, passed over, or pushed out for the crime of not fitting the corporate mold. There was Amira, a Nigerian software engineer, whose algorithm saved Griffin Tech from a catastrophic breach, but was never credited. Luis, a systems architect who designed a prototype that now powered one of Griffin's flagship models, though his name was erased before launch. Jaden, a trans black developer who created their internal UI, but was denied a raise for 3 years. Each story cut like glass, and yet here they stood, unbroken, waiting. Ruth introduced Rosa to the group with quiet reverence. "She's the next one," Ruth said, "and she's already shaking the ground." The Whisper Network embraced Rosa like family. They shared restricted resources, blueprints, back-channel emails, even old legal drafts the board never thought would see daylight. They taught her the internal systems Carter and his executives never imagined a janitor would touch. Rosa's nights transformed from solitary labor to collective resistance. She learned how to hide code inside diagnostic updates, how to plant firmware checks inside innocuous engine simulations. With every secret they gave her, she built more. Underneath Griffin Tech's radar, Rosa became a hidden powerhouse, still invisible in the elevators, and ignored in meetings, but growing in influence with every quiet key tap. One night, While reviewing the specs for Griffin's upcoming Phoenix hybrid line, Rosa spotted something terrifying. A fundamental design flaw in the battery-to-engine regulator, one that would degrade performance in under a year, leading to thermal instability and a high risk of malfunction. It was either a massive oversight or a cover-up. Carter had boasted on live television that the Phoenix line would revolutionize energy consumption. Investors were swarming. The stock price surged. But Rosa knew, if these cars hit the market, someone would get hurt. Maybe worse. She couldn't stay silent. Using a secure VPN routed through Ruth's defunct board login, Rosa drafted a carefully worded internal memo. No names, no accusations, just technical truth. Diagrams, calculations, projections. She labeled it urgent, safety risk in Phoenix line, confidential technical review, and sent it directly to the board. Then she waited. The fallout began within hours. Carter stormed into the boardroom the next morning, red-faced and rattled. "Who sent this?" he barked, slamming the memo onto the table. "This is sabotage." Ruth read through it calmly. "It's precise. If this is true, you've got a recall situation before launch." Carter's jaw tightened. "It's not true. And even if it were, this breach came from inside. We find the leak. We shut them down." He ordered the IT security team to trace the source. Layer after layer of encryption peeled away. Firewalls fell. And finally a location pinged. Basement level 2, janitorial storage. That evening, Rosa was tinkering with an early version of Echo when the doorknob to her closet jiggled, then turned. She looked up. Carter Hale stood in the doorway, eyes dark and jaw tight, holding her printed memo in one hand and a termination letter in the other. The doorknob clicked. The hinges groaned, and Carter Hale stepped into Rosa's sanctuary like a storm dressed in silk. His eyes scanned the room, blueprints on the wall, wires hanging from the ceiling like jungle vines, an engine prototype blinking quietly on the metal desk. He held two things in his hands: a copy of Rosa's anonymous memo and a formal termination letter, printed on Griffin Tech letterhead. His smile was thin, not friendly, surgical. "This little operation," he said, waving the memo, "nearly cost us a multi-million-dollar partnership." Rosa didn't move. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of her desk, body calm, gaze sharp. "It's a safety concern," she said simply. "That engine line could fail catastrophically." Carter dropped the memo onto her desk with theatrical ease. "Oh, spare me the hero complex. You're not an engineer, Langston. You're a janitor who got lucky with a wrench." He lifted the termination letter, gave it a little shake, like a prize. "Technically, I should let you go right now. Unauthorized access to internal documents. Unauthorized use of company hardware. Unauthorized intelligence leak." He let the weight of each accusation hang. Rosa didn't blink. "But," Carter continued, smoothing the paper with a finger, "I'm a fair man." He reached into his briefcase and produced another document. This one glossier, thicker, adorned with corporate branding and fine print. "Here's what I'm willing to do. We bring you on as a consultant. Temporary, non-public. No benefits, no titles. You stay in your lane. Pass along any insights you find. We'll give you a small stipend. Cash. Clean exit when the project's done." He smiled again, pleased with himself. "It's generous. For a janitor." Rosa stared at the document, then at Carter. She studied him the way she studied broken engines, listening for the misfire beneath the hum. And then she spoke, slowly, each word shaped with precision. "I don't want cash," she said. "I want credit. I want visibility. I want to walk through this building and have my name spoken with respect." Carter's eyes narrowed. "You want a name tag?" Rosa didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied, "because my mind deserves one." His mask cracked, just a fraction. The smirk faded, replaced by a flash of something raw and irritated. "You think you're bigger than this place?" he snapped. "You think you're some kind of rebel genius? This company was built on order, not daydreamers with blueprints in a broom closet." He leaned in, venom beneath the gloss. "You will take this deal, or I'll make sure you never work in tech again. Not even to fix a coffee machine." Rosa's heart pounded, but her hands stayed still. The tape recorder hidden under the blueprint rack caught every word. Later that night, Rosa sat on her worn couch in her tiny South Side apartment. Her sister Kendra, 17 and full of brilliance the world hadn't yet touched, sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old textbook pages. Rosa played the recording once, then shut it off. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. They don't see us, she said softly, more to herself than Kendra. They see threat. They see disruption. And they hate us for it. Kendra looked up, concern clouding her features. What are you gonna do? Rosa smiled. A tired, resolute smile carved from months of quiet rage. I'm not just fighting for me anymore, she said. I'm fighting for every girl with a brain too big for her zip code. For every janitor who's an inventor. For every genius they pushed into silence. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and pulled a padded envelope from the drawer, slipped the tape inside, then wrote one name on the front in black ink. Chloe Lynn, National Reporter, Tech and Ethics Division, Vox Media. As Rosa seals the envelope and walks toward the corner mailbox, a dark SUV pulls up across the street, and a figure steps out, watching her quietly, phone in hand. It started as a flicker on a low-traffic tech ethics blog. A short article titled, Leaked Audio Exposes CEO's Racist Deal with Black Janitor Engineer. A few reposts. A couple of retweets. Then it caught fire. Within hours, the audio clip. Rose's calm refusals. Carter's condescension. His venom-drenched voice hissing. Take this or you'll never fix a coffee machine again. Was everywhere. By morning, her name was trending on Twitter. Rosa Langston. Black janitor engineer. Mine deserves a name tag. People weren't just shocked. They were furious. Rosa became a symbol. A quiet war cry. Not a victim, but a visionary silenced by a machine that fed on invisibility. The internet did what the boardrooms wouldn't. It saw her. Memes flooded timelines. Images of mops morphing into blueprints. Captions that read, "You can't clean what's corrupt." Journalists flooded her inbox. Celebrities tweeted support. A viral TikTok creator reenacted the audio with actors, ending the clip with Rosa standing atop a car engine, arms crossed, while Carter faded into dust. By noon, tech blogs were publishing full exposés on Griffin Tech's racial power dynamics. Employees began leaking internal memos. Even some of the board members turned quietly sympathetic, retweeting articles and favoriting Rosa's quotes. Meanwhile, Carter Hale unraveled. He appeared on a live-streamed press conference, flanked by stiff PR managers. He tried to sound humble, tried to apologize. I deeply regret if my comments were misinterpreted, he said. I was engaging in professional sarcasm, a regrettable lapse in tone, but not intent. But the damage was done. His apology trended lower than Rosa's original audio. Comment sections tore him apart. Professional sarcasm, one user wrote. She fixed your car, you broke yourself. Late-night hosts roasted him mercilessly. Stock analysts downgraded Griffin Tech for reputation volatility. Corporate partners began pulling scheduled deals. Carter, for the first time, wasn't untouchable. Rosa watched the circus quietly from her living room. Kendra curled up beside her, wide-eyed. Her phone vibrated every minute, but she ignored most of it, until an email stood out. Subject, STEM Youth Summit, keynote invite. The body was short, warm, respectful. We would be honored if Rosa Langston could speak to our national audience about brilliance found in unlikely places. No, scratch that. Brilliance intentionally ignored. We want the real story. Your story. 2 weeks later, Rosa walked onto the summit stage to a standing ovation. She wore a gray pantsuit. Modest, sharp, borrowed. Her hair was braided in the same pattern her mother used to make when Rosa was just a girl learning to solder wires in the garage. She stood at the podium and looked out, not at CEOs, not at board members, but at hundreds of students. Black, brown, white, boys in hoodies, girls with notebooks, a few kids scribbling sketches in the margins of their programs. Future builders, future. Her voice didn't tremble. They told me I wasn't a cultural fit, she began, but what they meant was, I didn't match the reflection they saw in their boardroom mirrors. The crowd hushed. I fixed an engine that their best couldn't. I designed a system that outperformed their prototypes, but I didn't wear the right badge. I came from the wrong neighborhood. I knew too much for someone paid too little. Applause. They gave me a mop and called me invisible. I turned it into a schematic and made history. By the time she stepped off the stage, 2 national STEM nonprofits had offered her grants. A Black-owned tech incubator asked her to mentor, her inbox filled with letters from students, saying, "You showed me what's possible." But amid the whirlwind of admiration, one email quietly slipped in from a journalist named Tina Osborne, a veteran researcher with the Detroit Free Press. The subject line read, "I think I found something about your grandfather." Rosa opened it cautiously. Inside were scanned documents. letters, a photograph, and a patent dated 1976, registered under the name Thomas L. Langston, her grandfather. Not filed by Griffin Tech, not filed by any corporation, but filed privately, independently, silently, and denied by the U.S. Patent Office on technical redundancy grounds, despite no competing technology existing at the time. Attached was a note. This rejection was based on internal correspondence, likely influenced by a Griffin subsidiary lawyer. I think they crushed his patent behind closed doors. At the bottom of the email was a final chilling line from the journalist. You're not the first Langston they tried to erase, but you might be the last. Rosa sat at her kitchen table long after the email from journalist Tina Osborne had faded from her screen. Her tea gone cold beside her, the scanned photograph haunted her. A black and white image of a tall, stoic man in grease-stained coveralls, standing next to a skeletal engine prototype surrounded by nothing but bare Detroit concrete. Her grandfather, Thomas Langston, the man whose voice had raised her through her mother's memories, whose hands she had inherited without ever feeling their touch, the man who'd once believed his invention could change the world, and who, as it turned out, was quietly crushed before the world ever had the chance to hear him. The documents told a grim story. Thomas had developed a high-efficiency combustion engine design in the mid-70s that challenged the dominance of gas-guzzling automotive titans. A system so lightweight and low consumption that it could have advanced the fuel economy movement by decades. But as soon as he filed the patent, his garage was broken into, blueprints stolen, and a month later he was summoned to a downtown Detroit office, offered a consulting fee in exchange for dropping all claim. Rosa's mother, barely 10 at the time, remembered the fear in his voice when he came home. They said I could keep my silence and a check, he told her, or keep fighting and lose everything. He chose silence. The check was spent on rent and groceries, and the dream died in that garage. Now, decades later, Rosa felt the ember he'd swallowed reignite in her own throat. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. She had always wondered why her mother never let her tinker with engines as a kid, always discouraged her obsession with mechanics. Now she knew. It wasn't disapproval, it was protection. A mother trying to guard her daughter from the fire that had scorched her own father. But Rosa wasn't afraid. She felt her grandfather in her veins, in every click of her socket wrench and every line of code she scribbled in the margins of napkins and notes. She took time off work, not that anyone at Griffin Tech was assigning her tasks anymore. She returned to her Helchard home on Chicago's South Side and pulled open boxes that had sat untouched in the attic for years. Inside were yellowed schematics, labeled in her grandfather's careful print: pulse core ignition loop, V3, nanodrive compression map. There were 8mm tapes, rusting with time, and old oil-slicked spiral notebooks with calculations written in the margins of engine diagrams. One night, she sat cross-legged in the garage, an old VHS TV combo unit flickering in front of her, playing footage of Thomas demonstrating the prototype. His voice was calm. Sure, the secret, he said, adjusting a spark regulator with precision, ain't speed, it's memory. The engine's got to learn its rhythm like a body learns to walk. That line struck Rosa like lightning. She paused the tape, rewound it, wrote it down. The idea of an engine that adapts, one that doesn't just operate, but learns. What if she could adapt that principle to electric engines? Build an AI-mapped energy recall system that could optimize in real time based on environmental input, terrain, and driver history. No current electric engine in mass production had solved that puzzle. Rosa knew this was the evolution her grandfather had started, and now, she would finish it. She called it the Langston Loop, and she began designing immediately. For 2 straight weeks, Rosa barely slept. Her fingers blistered, her eyes bloodshot, her desk covered in parts, algorithms, grease, and dreams. Ruth Delaney connected her with a retired patent lawyer, Clarence Rowe, another name the company had tried to bury, who reviewed her documentation meticulously. This, he said slowly, tapping the corner of her simulation, is patentable and revolutionary. Rosa beamed. We file Monday, she said. But in the shadows of Griffin Tech, Carter Hale wasn't sleeping either. Despite the PR crisis, Carter still had eyes and ears inside the company's back channels. When someone from the Whisper network accidentally forwarded a debug test mentioning Langston loop architecture, Carter caught wind. His ego burned, not just from humiliation but from panic. He remembered the V12 file Ruth Delaney had once fought to keep buried. And now Rosa, this janitor turned symbol, was threatening to revive it. reinvent it, and stake a claim on tech that could shift an entire industry. He called his legal team immediately. "Find me everything she's touched," he ordered. "Designs, logins, timestamps. If it passed through a Griffin server, I own it." By Friday morning, as Rosa walked confidently into the Chicago patent office, prototype folder in hand, Carter was already on the phone with a fast-track patent attorney, trying to file a mirror application for similar tech, just vague enough to pass as unique, just fast enough to block Rosa's claim. What Carter didn't count on was Clarence Rowe, who knew every dirty trick the corporate patent world had ever deployed. Rosa's application hit the system 32 minutes before Carter's did. It was airtight, unique, innovative, validated. But as Rosa stepped out of the building into the warm afternoon light, her phone buzzed. A legal notification. Griffin Tech had filed an IP obstruction challenge, alleging that her design originated from internal company resources and may have utilized proprietary architecture, a legal block, delaying her claim, questioning her authorship. Rosa stared at the screen, her knuckles white, then slowly turned toward the city skyline and said aloud, "If they want a war over my name, they're about to get one." The patent block hit Rosa harder than any insult, any rejection, any whisper that ever trailed her through Griffin Tech's sterile hallways. It wasn't just a delay, it was a calculated erasure, dressed in legal language. It said, "You may have invented it, but we'll make sure you never own it." Her name, her lineage, her work. They wanted to lock it away behind corporate bars, but Rosa had been underestimated her entire life, and this time she wasn't alone. The story exploded again, but louder. Hashtags reignited with fury. Redlessa patent, Langston loop, fight the block. Op-eds flooded tech publications. The Atlantic published a feature titled, "The Woman Who Rebuilt Her Grandfather's Dream." Rosa became more than a symbol. She became a case study, a mirror to every black or brown inventor, forced to choose between survival and recognition. In that chaos, one name emerged from the legal storm like a sword drawn in daylight. Monica Arlen, a legendary civil rights and IP attorney who had once taken on the NFL and won. Monica was precise, sharp-eyed, with gray streaks in her locks, and a voice that never needed to rise to command attention. She appeared at Rosa's apartment with a leather briefcase, and a presence that instantly shifted the air. "I've reviewed the filings," she said. "Carter Hale's claim is fiction. Thin, strategic, but desperate." Rosa studied her unsure. "And you're helping me, why?" Monica gave a small smile. "Because I've spent 20 years watching men like Carter profit off genius they couldn't even begin to understand. And I don't do silence anymore." The case gained momentum like a storm gathering over glass. Monica filed a counter-motion to dissolve Griffin Tech's IP obstruction claim. The filings were clinical, unrelenting, and airtight, documenting every keystroke Rosa made on personal hardware. Timestamps showing invention occurred well outside of Griffin's systems. Monica subpoenaed Ruth Delaney, who delivered sworn testimony, detailing Carter's history of suppressing independent innovation. She even unearthed an internal Griffin memo from years ago, suggesting a policy to absorb and repurpose employee IP without attribution, if not filed through company channels. It was damning, and it was real. Public pressure became unbearable. Large corporate partners began freezing Griffin Tech contracts. 2 venture firms pulled out. Their flagship car launch was delayed indefinitely. The board held emergency sessions and demanded Carter issue a retraction, but he refused. "This is a war of ideas," he told them. "I am the innovator. They're trying to steal my legacy." But the mask had cracked. The world saw through it. The more he spoke, the more unhinged he appeared. His entitlement dressed up as expertise, his racism hidden behind NDAs and stiff grins. And still, Rosa waited, quiet, poised. Every morning she meditated in silence beside a photo of her grandfather, whispering his name like a vow. "You didn't die forgotten," she said one morning. "I won't let them bury you again." The trial date arrived on a cold Monday in February. The courtroom was small, but packed. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but reporters scribbled every detail. Rosa sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Monica and a pile of binders that held her blood, sweat, and code. Carter sat across, dressed in an immaculate suit, but his eyes flickered, less confident than before, more restless. The judge, a seasoned woman with a reputation for cutting through grandstanding, opened proceedings with firm clarity. "Today we examine authorship. ownership, and the systems that obscure both. Monica called Rosa to the stand. Rosa took her time walking up. She didn't shake, didn't rush. She sat, took the oath, and folded her hands. Her voice when she spoke was soft, measured, unflinching. I didn't ask for a platform. I asked for acknowledgement. I didn't expect to become a movement. I just wanted to build. She paused. They gave me a mop, and I made a blueprint. I wasn't in the room when the decisions were made, because people like me rarely are. But I was working, always working. Monica guided her through every phase of the Langston Loop's creation. Dates, code, video recordings of her design testing. The court heard how her grandfather's invention had been buried, how Rosa had reverse-engineered his legacy without access to formal labs or corporate tools. Carter's team objected repeatedly, trying to discredit, distract, but Rosa's facts held fast. She never raised her voice, never played victim. She didn't need to. The truth had its own volume. The judge leaned forward, brow furrowed, flipping through the patent filings. She looked at Rosa, then at Carter, then back again. She set the papers down slowly, then said, "Miss Langston, this case is unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of adjudicating intellectual property. It's not just legal, it's cultural, and it's unprecedented." The courtroom held its breath. The final morning arrived cloaked in anticipation. Every pew filled, every legal pad flipped open. Rosa sat in her usual place, calm and poised, but this time with something new etched across her expression. Not just defiance but resolve. Monica Arlen rested a hand gently on Rosa's forearm as the judge returned to her bench, legal folders tucked neatly beneath her gavel. Even Carter Hale seemed smaller, though his suit was immaculate and his tie perfectly knotted. He'd lost weight over the weeks, but more than that, he'd lost control of the narrative, the media, the public perception he had once commanded like a spotlight. Now that light belonged to Rosa. The judge adjusted her glasses and spoke clearly, each word landing with precision. This court finds that the invention known as the Langston Loop is the sole and original intellectual property of Miss Rosa Langston. Furthermore, the obstruction and challenge filed by Griffin Technologies constitutes a deliberate misuse of corporate legal power to suppress rightful ownership. This court orders the immediate transfer of patent rights to Miss Langston, the payment of restitution totaling $3.2 million for damages incurred, and the removal of any corporate claim related to the design, documentation, or associated branding. The courtroom erupted, not in gasps, but in thunderous applause. Rosa didn't move. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let it sink into her marrow. This wasn't just victory, it was vindication across generations. She had restored her grandfather's legacy, and she had done it not by shouting, but by building. Carter stood motionless as cameras flashed. His legal team whispered urgently, but he heard none of it. His reputation, the gleaming armor he'd polished for years, had cracked publicly. Headlines were already writing themselves outside. CEO Carter Hale loses landmark IP battle to janitor turned inventor. Investors began pulling out that afternoon. Griffin Tech's stocks dropped 14% within hours, and another 11% by week's end. Board members convened emergency meetings and issued internal memos distancing themselves from the unfortunate legal episode. Still, in a last-ditch attempt to salvage some kind of PR lifeline, Carter, pressured by his newly appointed crisis manager, offered Rosa a formal public apology at a televised press event. He read it from a teleprompter with eyes that couldn't meet the camera. "We regret the treatment Ms. Langston endured. Her brilliance was clear. Her invention is now rightly hers. Griffin Tech formally apologizes for any barriers she faced within our organization." Then, in a tone flat with forced civility, he added, "We would be honored if Ms. Langston would consider rejoining Griffin Tech in a senior role, head of experimental engineering with full recognition and equity stake." Rosa stood behind the stage curtain listening. When her moment came, she walked onto the platform, took the mic, and looked out at the rows of reporters. She held no notes. Her voice didn't rise. "I forgive you," she said simply, "but I won't return, because my dignity doesn't come with a contract." She let that hang. "I will not lead a lab where others like me are still made invisible. I'm not here to fix your company. I'm here to build mine." And with that, she left. Within 6 months, Rosa Langston filed incorporation papers for her own firm, Langston Motors, a company dedicated to ethical engineering, equitable hiring, and innovation rooted in community empowerment. She secured funding from Black venture firms, angel investors who had followed her case, and former Griffin Tech employees, who had quietly quit after the trial to join her. Her headquarters wasn't a glass skyscraper. It was a renovated warehouse on Chicago's South Side, where kids from nearby schools could walk past and see what invention really looked like. Her logo was simple, a hand holding a spark, her motto drawn from her courtroom testimony: "They gave me a mop. I built a blueprint." The day the shop opened, she stood outside as painters finalized the sign above the garage. Behind her, a fleet of volunteers assembled workbenches and arranged tools. Photographers clicked images of the moment, capturing a slice of living history. But it was the car that caught everyone's eye. Parked directly in front of Langston Motors was Carter Hale's old Bentley, the very one Rosa had fixed on that moonlit night, so many months ago. The one that had sparked the insult, the dare, the journey. Rosa ran her fingers along the hood. She didn't steal it. She bought it. Publicly. At a charity auction. Months after Carter's assets were liquidated to cover legal losses. She paid cash, and now it sat proudly at the door of a new legacy. The gleaming symbol of poetic justice. As Rosa unlocks the garage doors for her first day of business, a delivery van pulls up. Inside, an unmarked crate addressed from Detroit and stamped with her grandfather's initials. The crate was the size of a casket. Old, splintering wood, stamped with a smudged shipping label from a long-defunct warehouse in Detroit. On one side, burned faintly into the grain, were the initials TLL, Thomas Lionel Langston. Rosa stood in the doorway of her new garage, her hand resting on the edge of Carter's old Bentley, as the delivery crew wheeled the mysterious box onto the concrete floor. She didn't open it immediately. Some relics needed the right moment to speak. For now she locked it in the back room, and turned her focus forward toward building what the world once said she couldn't. Langston Motors launched not with a billion-dollar ad campaign, or a celebrity spokesperson, but with a community block party. Kids drew chalk blueprints on the sidewalk while their parents toured the shop. Jazz played from portable speakers. Rosa wore her gray coveralls like armor, her name stitched over the left breast in bold red thread. Behind her, the wall bore a mural of her grandfather's hands passing her a wrench, with a single phrase painted beneath: "What they buried, we built." She began hiring immediately. Not from Ivy Leagues, but from the margins. She posted calls for applications on forums for laid-off factory workers, community colleges, and programs for formerly incarcerated youth. She tapped into networks of underrepresented engineers, black women with master's degrees, who had spent years stuck in middle management, brilliant immigrants whose accents were often mistaken for incompetence, and even janitors from other tech firms who had once scribbled circuitry on lunch napkins. They came quietly at first, resumes wrinkled, eyes cautious. But when they met Rosa, something changed. She didn't interview them like a CEO. She listened like kin. One by one, they joined. Javon, a robotics genius pushed out of his last job for not being a cultural fit. Maya, a trans engineer whose AI security algorithm had been stolen by a venture-backed competitor. Jose, a high school dropout who could rebuild an electric motor blindfolded. Every hire brought fire, and every story added bricks to the foundation. Their first contract came from a nonprofit that ran hybrid shuttles for inner-city students. Their vehicles kept breaking down, and no major firm would bother helping. Rosa offered to redesign the system for a fraction of the cost. Within 3 weeks, the shuttles ran smoother, cleaner, and consumed 40% less energy. The nonprofit's CEO cried at the test drive. The second contract came from a European sustainable transport company. They'd seen a viral video of Rosa's team building modular battery units using salvaged laptop cells. The footage had been posted by a former intern, now a full-time employee at Langston Motors, who captioned it, "Imagine what's possible when genius isn't silenced." From there, momentum roared. Langston Motors became more than a company. It became a movement. Major tech blogs ran headlines like, "The garage that humbled a giant." MIT invited Rosa to deliver a keynote about equitable innovation. Google named her a future architect of change. Essence magazine put her on the cover under the headline, "She didn't ask for power, she engineered it." But Rosa stayed grounded. She started every day with her team, coffee in one hand, schematics in the other. No corner office, no private assistant. She insisted on walking the shop floor, mentoring her employees, troubleshooting issues with them elbow deep in engine grease. Her leadership wasn't performative, it was ancestral, a lineage of brilliance denied, now vindicated through every bolt tightened and every idea validated. Still, in the quiet hours after the lights dimmed and the buzz softened, she sometimes found herself in the back room, staring at the crate marked with her grandfather's name. She hadn't opened it yet. It felt sacred, like it held the final piece of a legacy still unfolding. Then one morning, as she sat reviewing torque specs on a new prototype, her office phone rang. The number on the screen was blocked. She almost didn't answer. But something in her gut said, "Take this one." She pressed the button. Rosa Langston speaking. A familiar voice came through, low and carefully measured. "Ms. Langston, this is Nathan from Griffin Tech. I'm calling on behalf of our new CEO. We've been following Langston Motors' progress closely." A pause. "We'd like to discuss a potential licensing agreement for the Langston Loop." Rosa didn't respond immediately. She looked around at her shop, at her people, at the mural of her grandfather. Then she leaned forward slowly, her voice even. "Is this call being recorded?" she asked. The line went silent. Then a second voice, one she knew all too well, cut in. "Rosa, it's Carter." The lobby hadn't changed. Same polished floors, same sterile lighting, same towering Griffin Tech logo gleaming like a monument to legacy and exclusion. But something in the air had shifted. When Rosa Langston stepped through the revolving doors, she was no longer the woman wheeling a mop cart through the back corridors. She entered with her head high, her stride steady, trailed by two team members in Langston Motors jackets, and the legal team that had helped her rewrite the rules. It was a return but not a homecoming. She didn't owe them nostalgia. The building was quieter than usual, though word of her arrival had clearly spread. By the time she reached the executive floor, a small crowd of employees had gathered, administrators, engineers, interns, custodial staff. Many looked down as she passed. A few whispered apologies she couldn't fully hear, but others looked her in the eye, offering a nod or a quiet, "Welcome back." The faces had changed, but the memory remained of nights when she'd walked these same halls in silence, ignored, joked about, rendered invisible despite the brilliance running through her veins. At the elevator bay, Rosa paused. It was the same one where two junior execs once cracked a joke about her hair smelling like bleach. She'd said nothing then. Today, as the doors opened, she stepped in slowly, letting the new weight of her presence stretch through the air. On the top floor, she was greeted not by Carter Hale, but by Lana Edwards, Griffin Tech's newly appointed CEO. A sharp South Asian woman with a reputation for dismantling toxic legacy systems. Lana extended her hand with sincere respect. "Ms. Langston," she said, "we're honored you're here, and we hope to begin better. No speeches, no performances, just the unspoken understanding that Rosa's name now echoed through these walls, not in mockery, but in reverence." They walked her into the innovation wing, where once she hadn't even been allowed to apply. Inside a sunlit conference room, the table was cleared, the contract printed, awaiting only one signature. But Rosa didn't sit immediately. "Before I sign," she said, "let's be clear. This isn't a partnership. This is a transaction. You're licensing Langston Loop, under Langston Motors terms. There will be no co-patents, no joint branding, and no ghostwriting. The name stays intact." Lana nodded. "Understood." Rosa added, "And 50% of the licensing fee goes into the Langston Fund, a scholarship and mentorship program for Black and Brown innovators who get shut out before they get a chance." "Done," Lana said, with no hesitation. Then Rosa sat, took the pen, and signed. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. After the meeting, Lana escorted her through the wing, an elegant space lined with glass offices and ergonomic workstations. At the far end was a wide white wall once engraved with the name Hale Lab. Now it was blank, freshly painted. "We'd like you to name it," Lana said. Rosa turned toward the empty surface. She thought about her grandfather. About the notebook he'd filled with sketches that the world never saw. She thought about how she used to clean this floor at 2 a.m. Her knuckles cracked from chemical scrubbing, humming the rhythm of engines in her mind. She thought of her mother, who'd warned her the world was not ready for a woman like her. And yet here she stood, more than ready. She lifted the chalk pen Lana handed her and wrote in crisp, steady strokes, "The Langston Lab." The room erupted into quiet applause. But Rosa didn't linger. She excused herself and walked alone down the back hallway, instinct guiding her to the janitorial lounge, a space she hadn't entered in years. The door creaked open, unchanged. Metal lockers, plastic chairs, faded corkboard. It smelled like ammonia and memory. There, mopping the far side of the hall, was a teenage boy in overalls. Black, slim, nervous. He looked up, startled. Dropped the mop. You're her, he said, breath catching. Rosa smiled softly. I used to be you. He bent down, picked up something from the floor, a weathered composition notebook. I didn't mean to bother you. I write stuff sometimes. Designs. Like, just ideas, you know? He held it out to her, trembling slightly. Can I show you something? Rosa took it gently, flipped through pages, filled with unpolished but vivid schematics. Motor sketches, aerodynamic shapes, notes in the margins, like whispered dreams. Her eyes scanned the designs, and her throat tightened. There was something brilliant here. Not complete, not refined, but real. She closed the notebook, handed it back with care. She leaned in and whispered, You still working here tomorrow? He nodded. Rosa smiled, her eyes sharp. Good. Because we're going to build this. Together. Micah showed up the next day before sunrise. He waited outside Langston Motors, clutching his notebook like a passport. His janitor's uniform was freshly pressed, his sneakers scrubbed clean, and his eyes wide with something rare, hope laced with disbelief. Rosa arrived just before 7, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other. She saw him immediately, nodded once, and unlocked the door without a word. Inside, she tossed him a pair of gloves and pointed toward the workbench. No pressure, she said. But I don't waste time. That was how their mentorship began, not with ceremony, but with steel, sweat, and shared rhythm. Rosa taught him the same way her grandfather had taught her, through action. She didn't dumb things down. She didn't slow her pace. She demanded brilliance and gave him space to rise to it, and Micah did. Within weeks, he was modifying Rosa's early circuit designs, asking questions she hadn't anticipated, and sketching concepts that fused his love of music with kinetic energy transfer. He was curious, obsessive, beautifully raw. Watching him, Rosa often felt a strange ache, an echo of the girl she used to be, left alone in a supply closet, with nothing but blueprints and silence. She saw the fear in Micah's eyes too, the fear of being discovered before he was ready, of being laughed at for dreaming beyond his station. She vowed to extinguish that fear, not just in him but in every kid like him. No more secrets, no more quiet brilliance rotting behind locked. And so she took the next step. She founded the Thomas L. Langston Memorial Fund, a scholarship program aimed at young inventors from under-resourced communities. It didn't just cover tuition, it funded tools, mentorship, workshop space, and legal guidance. Because Rosa knew it wasn't just about education, it was about access, safety, visibility. Her first batch of scholars included a foster teen who'd reverse-engineered a drone from spare smartphone parts, a wheelchair-bound girl who designed a solar-powered home lift, and a non-binary coder from rural Georgia, whose AI program translated rhythm into math tutoring. Each one reminded Rosa that genius wasn't rare, it was just routinely ignored. Langston Motors began forging partnerships with local public schools, charter programs, and juvenile rehabilitation centers. Rosa sent her engineers out with kits instead of brochures. Instead of talking about engineering, they brought soldering irons and sensors and let kids build. She hired educators who didn't look like professors, but who taught like revolutionaries. A montage of hope began unfolding across Chicago. A 6th-grade girl, welding her first motor in a rusted garage as her little brother clapped in the background. A class of high school students gathered around a 3D printer salvaged from e-waste, holding their first prototype. A deaf teen designing a vibration-sensitive steering system, so others like him could feel acceleration instead of hearing it. Micah, now in a Langston Motors lab coat, standing before a room of students, notebook in hand, explaining fluid dynamics with nothing but a marker and absolute fire in his voice. Rosa watched them all from the edges of rooms, arms folded, heart full. She didn't want applause. She wanted a pipeline, a world where nobody like her ever had to beg for acknowledgement again. One morning, as she wrapped up a call about expanding the scholarship into Detroit, her assistant handed her a thick envelope with a gold-embossed seal. Inside was an official invitation from the United States House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. They wanted Rosa Langston to testify before Congress. The topic: systemic barriers to inclusion in STEM. Root causes and rebuilding. She stared at the letter for a long time. Rosa folded it slowly, placed it in her drawer, and whispered, "They built that table without us. Now I'll carve our names into it." The chamber was colder than Rosa expected. Polished mahogany glistened under artificial light. Cameras clicked. Senators whispered. The air buzzed with the rigid choreography of American tradition. Old money in tailored suits, nodding along to protocols they had memorized decades earlier. Rosa stood at the center of it all, a lone figure in slate gray, the Langston Loop logo stitched subtly into her collar. Behind her, on twin projection screens, played a silent montage of black and brown inventors erased by time, system failures masked as meritocracy, and blueprints crumpled by prejudice. The moment had come. She placed her notes on the podium. Didn't glance at them once. "My name is Rosa Langston," she began, voice steady but rich with marrow. "And I am the daughter of an erased legacy. My grandfather invented an engine that could have reshaped the automotive world in the 1970s. Instead, he died in silence. I invented its evolution, and was nearly forced to do the same. I'm not here today because I'm exceptional. I'm here because I was lucky enough to survive long enough to be seen." Some in the room shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward. "I cleaned your buildings while I taught myself thermodynamics. I studied friction coefficients on lunch breaks, and coded AI systems after mopping floors. Not because I had to, but because I had no other door open. And when I did break through, the response wasn't celebration. It was litigation, sabotage, and silence." Rosa paused, letting her words land with gravity. Innovation is not suffering from a talent shortage. It's suffering from a recognition shortage, from a culture of gatekeeping masked as excellence, from resumes that get tossed because of zip codes and names that don't sound like yours. A few members of the committee glanced at each other, some nodding, some clearly stiffening. "I'm asking Congress today to pass the STEM Equity and Accountability Act, legislation that will ensure equitable access to funding, enforce accountability in hiring and promotion practices, and protect innovators from corporate IP exploitation, especially when they sit outside traditional power structures." Behind her, the screens flashed images of former employees at Langston Motors, diagrams of her scholarship fund, testimonies from students she'd mentored, each frame a rebuttal to the myth that genius only wears a lab coat and speaks with Ivy League diction. There was silence, then scattered applause, some enthusiastic, others hesitant. One congressman muttered something under his breath that didn't reach the mic, but Rosa caught the curl of his lips, skepticism wrapped in civility. She looked him directly in the eye as she delivered her final line. "Every system is designed to get the results it gets. So if your system has erased 1,000 Rosa Langstons before me, maybe it's working exactly as intended, and it's time to redesign it." The applause rose, not as a standing ovation, but as a steady current building across the chamber, into living rooms, across social media, into schools, churches, garages, and startup offices. The speech aired that night on every major network. A clip of Rosa's final line hit 30 million views in a single weekend. Hashtags returned. But this time, they weren't about her. They were about what came next. She became more than a person. She became a movement. Panels were formed. Lobbyists began calculating new talking points. Griffin Tech's new board made a public donation to the Langston Fund. Other companies followed, some out of guilt, others out of strategy. Universities added her speech to required reading lists. High schoolers performed it at debate tournaments. And Rosa? She returned to her workshop quietly, because change didn't live in rooms like that. It lived in the hands of builders. Late one evening, as she was tightening bolts on a prototype Micah had helped design, her assistant walked in, holding a sleek business card embossed with gold trim. "You've got a visitor," she said. Rosa wiped her hands, walked into the lobby, and found a woman standing there with a handheld camera and an unmistakable presence. Young, sharp-eyed, deeply still. The kind of presence that says, "I've been watching for a long time, and I'm finally here to ask." The woman extended her hand. "I'm Aria Vaughn, filmmaker. I've followed your story since the court case. I've seen the speeches, the headlines, but I know there's more. The nights nobody saw, the years you almost gave up. The things you've never said out loud." She reached into her bag and pulled out a storyboard mock-up. "I want to tell the whole story. No filters, no edits, just truth. Are you ready to show the world everything?" Rosa stared at the storyboard, then turned and pointed to the crate still unopened in the back of her workshop. "I'll show you everything," she said. "But first, we open that." So, the crate made a sound when they opened it, low groaning, like it had been holding its breath for decades. Aria Vaughn's camera captured every moment. Rosa stood at its edge, gloves on, heart thudding in her chest like an echo of her grandfather's. Micah stood beside her, still and reverent. Inside, wrapped in old oil rags and time-yellowed canvas, was the prototype, Thomas Langston's original engine. It was smaller than she expected, more compact. The craftsmanship was raw, unpolished, but there was elegance in the symmetry. It had survived fire, theft, sabotage, and silence, and now, it would live again, not as a relic, but as the origin of a movement. Rosa nodded once, and turned to Aria. "This is where the story begins," she said softly. The documentary took nearly a year to complete. Aria didn't rush Rosa. She filmed long hours through meetings, community builds, late-night lab sessions. She captured Rosa mentoring Micah, reviewing scholarships, helping kids from the South Side solder their first boards. But most importantly, she filmed the quiet Rosa staring at her grandfather's notes, breathing through memory, whispering forgiveness into the silence of a system that had once tried to erase her. The final cut was intimate, raw and deeply human. Langston Rewired premiered at Sundance to a standing ovation. Streaming platforms entered a bidding war. When it dropped globally on a Friday night, it reached over 60 million views within 2 weeks. The story of a black woman who once scrubbed conference room floors becoming the architect of a new era of ethical engineering lit a fire across industries. It was more than inspiration. It was blueprint. In one unforgettable scene, Rosa returns to the Griffin Tech parking lot, walks to the spot where she first fixed Carter Hale's Bentley under moonlight, and places a small brass plaque on the asphalt. It reads, "Here is where you dared me to dream smaller, and I said no." The internet devoured it. Critics called the film a love letter to invisible brilliance. Teachers screened it in classrooms. Parents wept with their daughters. Young inventors from Nairobi to Detroit emailed Langston Motors asking how they could join. Rosa's face became iconic, not because she was famous, but because she had become a mirror. She was everyone who had ever been told not you. And somewhere in a high-rise penthouse, Carter Hale watched it in silence. No assistants, no press around him, just the blue glow of the screen, and a drink untouched in his hand. The documentary showed everything, the audio, the trial, the downfall, but it never demonized him. It didn't need to. His actions spoke for themselves. When the screen faded to black, he didn't move for a long time. Then he reached for the remote, and turned it off. Meanwhile, Rosa returned to where the real work lived. A local middle school had invited her to speak. Instead, she brought toolkits. She walked into a fluorescent-lit classroom of 20 black girls, and said nothing at first. Just set a box of screwdrivers on each table, rolled up her sleeves, and opened a circuit board. When she finally spoke, it was quiet. "No one handed me a seat at the table, so I built my own." A student raised her hand. "But how did you know where to start?" Rosa smiled. "I didn't. I just knew I wasn't going to let them finish the story without me." She handed out tasks. "You map the circuit path. You check voltage levels. You start sketching how you'd fix the cooling gap." The girls dove in, unsure at first, then faster, louder, brighter. Rosa moved between them like water, correcting gently, affirming fiercely. Every time one looked up for permission, Rosa just nodded. "You've got it." After class, she walked back into her office at Langston Motors. The walls were covered with photographs, employees, students, blueprints, letters from parents, a framed scholarship check from MIT's Black Innovator Fund. But at the center of her desk sat only one thing, a photo of her grandfather in his garage, the edges curled, the ink fading. Rosa stared at it for a long moment, then reached for her journal. She scribbled a single sentence in bold strokes across the next page. "They gave me a mop, and I turned it into a legacy." She closed the journal, smiled, and then picked up a screwdriver. ChatGPT said. They called her a janitor. She became an architect of change. If her story made you feel something, if you've ever seen brilliance ignored because of skin or silence, type yes. If you believe in justice.